Picture this. You've worked every day for 30 years, building something meaningful while your daughter grows up thinking you're barely scraping by. Then she looks you in the eye and says your money isn't good enough for her dream wedding. What she doesn't know is that her dream venue belongs to you. Sometimes life has a way of teaching lessons that words never could. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The grease under my fingernails told the same story it had for 3 decades at Thompson's Auto Repair. Every morning at 6, I'd unlock the bay doors of the small shop on Richmond's north side, fire up the coffee pot, and get ready for another day of honest work. The neighborhood wasn't fancy, but it was real. Working folks bringing in their vehicles, trusting me to keep them running without breaking their budgets. That trust meant everything to me. Jessica had different ideas about what mattered. My daughter sat across from me at Romano's Italian restaurant, the same place where I'd celebrated her college graduation 5 years ago. Back then, her eyes had sparkled with gratitude when I handed her the diploma frame I'd saved up to buy. Tonight, those same green eyes held something colder as she pushed her engagement ring toward the candlelight. "Dad, Brandon and I have been talking about the wedding budget," she began, her voice carrying the practiced tone she'd developed since moving to her downtown loft. "We appreciate that you want to contribute, but honestly, we need to be realistic about your financial situation." I set down my coffee cup, watching the steam rise between us like the distance that had grown over the past few years. "What exactly are you saying, Jess?" "You run a small auto repair shop, Dad. I know things are tight." She glanced around the restaurant, as if embarrassed to be seen having this conversation. "Brandon's family has connections with some really upscale venues, places that match our vision for the kind of wedding we want." The kind of wedding they wanted. I remembered when Jessica was 7, spinning around our living room in one of Sarah's old dresses, declaring she'd have her wedding in a castle with 1,000 flowers. After her mother passed, those dreams became my responsibility to nurture, even when I had no idea how I'd ever afford them. "Tell me about this vision," I said quietly. Brandon shifted in his seat, adjusting his designer watch. His family owned a successful real estate development company, the kind that built shopping centers and office complexes across Richmond. Everything about him screamed money, from his perfectly styled hair to his Italian leather shoes. "Well, Mr. Thompson," he said, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd never worried about money, "we're looking at venues like Magnolia Gardens Estate. It's the premier location in Richmond for elegant celebrations." My heart stopped. Magnolia Gardens Estate. The 20-acre property I'd purchased quietly 12 years ago after a decade of careful investments that Jessica knew nothing about. The same venue where Richmond's wealthiest families hosted their most important events, generating enough revenue to fund a dozen auto repair shops. "That sounds expensive," I managed. Jessica leaned forward, her voice taking on the patient tone she might use with a child. "Dad, that's exactly my point. Places like that cost $40,000 just for the venue rental. The total wedding budget we're looking at is around $150,000. She said it like she was breaking devastating news, explaining why someone like me could never participate in something so grand. What she didn't know was that Magnolia Gardens had been entirely paid for years ago, and its monthly revenue exceeded what most people earned annually. "I see," I said, taking another sip of coffee to buy time. "So what exactly are you proposing?" Brandon cleared his throat. "My parents have graciously offered to handle the major expenses: the venue, catering, flowers, photography. We want you to know that your contribution isn't necessary." Not necessary. 28 years of raising Jessica alone, of choosing her needs over my own wants, of building a business that could support her dreams. And my contribution wasn't necessary? "We're thinking you could maybe handle some of the smaller items," Jessica added quickly, as if throwing me a bone. "Wedding favors, Or perhaps the rehearsal dinner at somewhere more appropriate for your budget. There's a nice chain restaurant near your shop that does private parties. The casual cruelty of it hit like a physical blow. My daughter was categorizing me as too poor for her wedding while sitting 10 miles away from property I owned that was worth more than Brandon's family home. She was offering to let me pay for wedding favors while dismissing my ability to contribute anything meaningful. "Have you actually visited Magnolia Gardens?" I asked. "Oh, yes." Jessica's face lit up for the first time that evening. "It's absolutely stunning. The main ballroom has these incredible crystal chandeliers, and the gardens are like something from a fairy tale. The coordinator, Sarah Chen, was so professional. She showed us everything and explained how they only work with the most exclusive vendors." Sarah Chen, my property manager, who handled the day-to-day operations while I maintained my cover as a simple auto repair shop owner. Sarah, who sent me detailed monthly reports about bookings, revenue, and maintenance needs. Sarah, who had no idea that the gruff mechanic who occasionally stopped by to check on groundskeeping was actually her employer. "It sounds perfect for you," I said honestly. "It really is. Brandon's mother, Victoria, has connections with the events coordinator there. She's going to help us secure our date." Jessica reached across the table and patted my hand like I was an elderly relative. "Dad, I hope you understand. This isn't about not wanting you involved. It's about being practical." Practical. Jessica thought she was being practical by accepting charity from her future in-laws while rejecting help from the man who'd actually earned the money to pay for her dreams. She thought practicality meant dismissing her father's worth while fawning over a family whose acceptance she craved. The waiter approached to refill our coffee cups, and I watched Jessica automatically straighten her posture, ensuring she looked sophisticated even for a stranger. Every gesture calculated to project an image of belonging to a world she thought was beyond my reach. "When is the wedding date you're hoping for?" I asked. "October 15th? It's peak season, so the venue is in high demand, but Victoria believes her connections will make the difference." October 15th. I knew that date intimately because Sarah had mentioned it during our last meeting. A premium Saturday in peak wedding season, one of the most requested dates of the year. What Brandon's family didn't know was that no amount of connections could override the property owner's ultimate authority over bookings. "That's a beautiful time of year," I said honestly. "The foliage will be perfect for photos," Jessica agreed, her eyes dreaming of possibilities she thought were beyond my capability to provide. "Dad, I want you to know that just because the wedding itself is going to be upscale doesn't mean we don't value you. You raised me, and that matters more than money." More than money. She said it like she meant it. But her entire conversation had been about dismissing my financial capacity while embracing someone else's. Her words spoke of valuing me, while her actions screamed the opposite. I finished my coffee and reached for the check, a gesture that had become automatic after 30 years of making sure Jessica never worried about small expenses like dinner. Brandon moved to intercept, but I was faster. "Please, Mr. Thompson, allow me," he insisted. "I've got this one," I replied, placing 2 20s on the table. "Congratulations on your engagement." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"I hope everything works out exactly as you'd planned." The drive home took me past Magnolia Gardens estate. Even in the evening darkness, the property looked magnificent. Solar lighting illuminated the winding driveway that led to the main house, a restored colonial mansion that served as the centerpiece for receptions. Behind it, manicured gardens stretched toward the river, dotted with gazebos and fountains that had cost more to install than most people spent on entire weddings. I'd bought the property when a real estate developer defaulted during the recession. Years of careful investing, of living modestly while building wealth through rental properties and smart acquisitions, had culminated in owning Richmond's most prestigious wedding venue. The irony wasn't lost on me that my daughter's dream location had been purchased with money she thought didn't exist. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Thanks for dinner, Dad. I know this is hard to hear, but I really think this arrangement is best for everyone. Love you." Best for everyone. Jessica thought she was protecting my feelings by accepting her in-laws' charity instead of allowing her father to provide for her wedding. She thought love meant shielding me from expenses while embracing others who offered the same support. I pulled into my driveway, the modest two-story house that had been home since Jessica was born. The mortgage had been paid off for 15 years. But I'd never felt the need to move somewhere that broadcast my financial success. This house held memories of Jessica's childhood, of bedtime stories and homework sessions, of the years when being her father was the most important role in my life. Tomorrow I would return to Thompson's Auto Repair, grease under my fingernails, listening to customers share their troubles while I fixed their vehicles. But tonight, I sat in my kitchen and opened the folder I kept locked in my desk drawer. Property deeds, investment accounts, business partnership agreements, and tax returns that told the real story of Harold Thompson's financial situation. The auto repair shop was profitable, but it was the smallest part of my portfolio. Rental properties across Richmond generated steady monthly income. Commercial real estate investments had appreciated significantly over the past decade, and Magnolia Gardens estate, purchased for $800,000, now appraised at over $2 million. Jessica had grown up thinking we struggled financially because I'd chosen to live modestly and invest wisely rather than display wealth. Every dollar spent on luxury would have been a dollar not working to build her future security. She'd interpreted my frugality as poverty, never understanding that her college education had been funded by careful wealth building rather than financial strain. The wedding she thought was beyond my reach could be paid for in cash without touching my retirement accounts. The venue she considered impossibly expensive was an asset that generated income while she dreamed of affording it. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Sarah Chen. As property manager, she typically only called during business hours unless something urgent required immediate attention. I dialed her back, suspecting the reason for her evening outreach. "Harry, thank God you called back." Sarah's voice carried obvious relief. "I have the strangest meeting today with the Reed family about an October wedding booking. Victoria Reed seemed to think her connections would guarantee availability, but when I checked our system, October 15th is completely open. She mentioned some relationship with the owner, but I've never heard of any Reed family connection. Should I be concerned about something I'm missing?" "No concern, Sarah. Handle it exactly as you would any other inquiry. Full deposit required to hold the date, standard contract terms, no special arrangements." The bride-to-be, Jessica Thompson Reed, was absolutely lovely. She seemed to think the booking was just a formality, though. I'd hate for there to be any miscommunication about our policies.
Jessica Thompson Reed. My daughter had already hyphenated her name in her own mind, preparing to join a family she thought could provide what her father could not. "Sarah, I want you to handle this booking with complete professionalism. No shortcuts, no special treatment, everything by the book." Of course, the family seems very confident about securing the date, so I assume they'll be prepared for our deposit requirements. After ending the call, I sat in my kitchen until well past midnight, thinking about the conversation at dinner. Jessica's dismissal hadn't been malicious, but it had been absolute. She'd written me off as irrelevant to her important life decisions, while simultaneously expressing love and gratitude for my role as her father. The contradiction revealed everything wrong with how I'd raised her. By shielding Jessica from financial realities, by handling expenses without explanation, by living modestly while building wealth quietly, I'd created a daughter who respected my character while dismissing my capabilities. October 15th was 4 months away. 4 months for Jessica to plan her dream wedding while assuming someone else would pay for it. 4 months for her to continue believing her father was too poor to matter in the most important celebration of her life. The property deed for Magnolia Gardens estate lay on my kitchen table. Harold Thompson listed clearly as sole owner. Tomorrow, Sarah Chen would send Victoria Reed a standard contract requiring a $20,000 deposit to secure October 15th. The Reed family would either pay it, earning the right to host their son's wedding, or they would discover that connections meant nothing without financial backing. Either way, Jessica was about to learn that her father's worth couldn't be measured by the grease under his fingernails or the modest neighborhood where he chose to live. She was about to discover that love sometimes required lessons that comfort never could provide. The October wedding would happen exactly as Jessica envisioned, but the story of who made it possible was about to change completely. Monday morning arrived with the familiar rhythm of work boots on concrete and the metallic symphony of tools against engines. Thompson's Auto Repair opened at 6 sharp, just like it had for 3 decades. Frank Martinez pulled up in his delivery truck right on schedule, hauling parts for the transmission rebuild we'd been working on. The normalcy felt grounding after Saturday's dinner revelation. "Morning, Harry," Frank called out, hefting a cardboard box from his truck bed. "Got those transmission parts you ordered. This rebuild giving you trouble?" "Nothing I can handle," I replied, accepting the heavy box. Frank had been supplying parts to my shop for 15 years, watching me build the business from a 2-bay operation to the 6-bay facility it was today. He knew the rhythm of my work, the steady stream of loyal customers who trusted Thompson's for honest repairs at fair prices. What Frank didn't know, what nobody in this neighborhood knew, was that Thompson's Auto Repair was my cover story. The business was profitable and legitimate, but it represented less than 10% of my actual income. The real money came from properties scattered across Richmond, commercial buildings that housed everything from medical offices to retail chains, all generating monthly rent checks that dwarfed what most people considered substantial salaries. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Chen at Magnolia Gardens. "Meeting scheduled with Reed family this afternoon at 2 p.m. They seem very confident about securing the October date. Standard deposit requirements apply." The Reed family was about to discover that confidence and connections meant nothing without financial backing. Victoria Reed's assumption that her social network could override standard business practices was about to collide with reality. At precisely 9 o'clock, my shop door chimed as Mrs. Patterson brought in her aging Honda Civic. She was 73, lived on a fixed income, and worried constantly about car repair costs.
For customers like her, I kept my margins thin and my explanations detailed. She deserved honesty about what needed fixing and what could wait. "Harry, it's making that noise again," she said, her voice carrying the anxiety that came with unexpected expenses. "I'm hoping it's nothing serious." "Let's take a look," I said, popping the hood. "We'll figure out exactly what's causing the problem before we discuss any repairs." The noise turned out to be a loose belt, a $15 fix that took 20 minutes to complete. Mrs. Patterson's relief was worth more than any profit margin. She'd been widowed for 8 years, stretching her Social Security to cover expenses while maintaining her independence. Customers like her reminded me why I'd built this business in the first place. "You're a blessing, Harry," she said, counting out exact change from her worn purse. "I don't know what folks in this neighborhood would do without you." The irony struck me as I watched her drive away. Mrs. Patterson valued my service because it solved her problems without breaking her budget. She appreciated honesty, reliability, and fair dealing. Everything Jessica had dismissed as insufficiently sophisticated for her wedding celebration. My daughter wanted elegance and prestige, things she associated with Brandon's family wealth. She couldn't see that the same principles that made Thompson's Auto Repair successful had built the fortune that could easily afford her dream wedding. Hard work, smart investments, and treating people fairly had created wealth that she thought didn't exist.
Around noon, I called Patricia Wells, the attorney who handled my business affairs. Patricia had managed my real estate investments for 12 years, watching a modest auto shop owner gradually acquire properties across Richmond. She understood the value of discretion and had never questioned my preference for maintaining a low profile. "Harry, good to hear from you," Patricia said. "How can I help you today?" "I need you to review the management agreements for Magnolia Gardens estate, specifically the booking policies and deposit requirements." "Is there a problem with Sarah Chen's management?" "No problem. I want to ensure all procedures are being followed correctly. There may be a situation where someone attempts to use influence rather than following standard protocols." Patricia understood immediately. After years of handling business dealings for wealthy clients who preferred anonymity, she recognized when someone was trying to work around proper procedures. "I'll review everything and confirm that Sarah has complete authority to enforce all policies. No exceptions, no special arrangements." "Perfect. Also, I want you to prepare documentation showing my ownership of all properties, particularly Magnolia Gardens. Complete records, purchase documents, tax filings, everything." "Planning to go public with your investments?" "Possibly. I'll let you know." The afternoon brought steady work and familiar conversations. Regular customers stopped by to check on repairs, new clients called for estimates, and the rhythm of running an honest business continued unchanged. Nobody who walked through Thompson's Auto Repair would suspect that the grease-stained owner could write a check for $2 million without touching his savings account. At 2:30, Sarah Chen called from Magnolia Gardens. "Harry, I just finished the strangest meeting with the Reed family," she said, her voice carrying obvious confusion. "Victoria Reed seemed to think the October 15th booking was already confirmed. When I explained our deposit requirements, she became quite agitated." "How agitated?" "She demanded to speak with the owner, claimed she had personal relationships that should override normal procedures. When I explained that the owner requires all bookings to follow standard protocols, she threatened to take her business elsewhere." "What did you tell her?" "That we'd be sorry to lose their business, but our policies applied to everyone equally." She left without putting down a deposit, insisting that she'd resolve this through her connections. Victoria Reed was discovering that Magnolia Gardens estate couldn't be bullied or manipulated. The venue that represented Richmond's pinnacle of wedding elegance operated according to business principles, not social hierarchies. "Sarah, document everything about this meeting. Note the specific demands, the threats, and their departure without securing the date." "Of course." "Harry, should I be concerned about any pressure from above?" Mrs. Reed seemed very confident that she could go around standard procedures. "No pressure will come from above. Handle all future interactions exactly as you did today." After ending the call, I sat in my office thinking about the collision between Jessica's expectations and reality. She'd assumed Brandon's family connections would secure her dream venue without understanding how business actually worked. Victoria Reed's confidence had been based on social networking rather than financial capability. My phone rang again. Jessica's name appeared on the screen. "Dad, we have a problem." Her voice carried the stress of someone whose carefully laid plans were falling apart. "The venue we wanted isn't working out the way Brandon's family expected." "What kind of problem?" "The coordinator at Magnolia Gardens is being completely unreasonable. She's demanding a $20,000 deposit just to hold the date, and she won't make any exceptions even though Victoria has connections throughout Richmond's social scene." $20,000. The deposit that seemed impossible to Jessica represented less than 2 months' rent income from my commercial properties. The amount she considered unreasonable was money I could access from any number of accounts without affecting my daily operations. "That does sound like a lot," I said carefully. "Victoria is furious. She's never been treated so dismissively at a venue of that caliber. The coordinator, Sarah something, acted like Victoria's recommendations meant nothing." Sarah Chen had done exactly what any professional property manager should do. She'd applied standard business practices equally, regardless of who walked through the door. The fact that Victoria Reed interpreted professional behavior as dismissive revealed everything about her expectations of special treatment. Maybe there are other venues that would work better, I suggested. Dad, you don't understand. Magnolia Gardens is the venue in Richmond. Everything else is second-rate compared to what they offer. Brandon and I toured the property last month, and it's absolutely perfect. The gardens, the ballroom, the service level, everything is exactly what we dreamed about. The property that Jessica considered perfect had been purchased with money she thought didn't exist, managed by professionals she'd never heard of, and maintained by groundskeeping crews I employed directly. Her dream venue existed because her father had made smart investments while she assumed he struggled financially. What are Brandon's parents planning to do? Victoria is making calls to people she knows in Richmond's business community. She's convinced someone will intervene and make this coordinator see reason. Brandon says his mother has connections that can override any venue's policies. Victoria Reed was about to discover that Richmond's business community operated on financial reality rather than social favors. The calls she was making would lead to polite conversations that accomplished nothing. Magnolia Gardens Estate's booking policies weren't suggestions that could be waived for the right connections. I hope it works out, I said. Dad, I hate to ask this, but if Victoria can't resolve the venue situation, would you be able to help with some of the wedding costs? I know money is tight for you, but maybe we could find a less expensive venue that would work within your budget. The request carried the same condescending tone as Saturday's dinner conversation. Jessica was offering to let me contribute to a scaled-down version of her wedding, something more appropriate for my assumed financial limitations.
She still had no concept that her dream venue was completely within my reach. Let's see how things develop with Brandon's family first, I said. Okay. Dad, I want you to know that I appreciate your willingness to help, even though this situation is more expensive than what you're probably used to handling. More expensive than what I was used to handling. Jessica had no idea that I'd been handling expenses far beyond her imagination for years. Every month, I managed property maintenance, insurance payments, and business operations that dwarfed typical household budgets. The wedding costs that seemed overwhelming to her represented routine monthly expenditures in my actual financial world. After ending the call, I pulled out the folder containing Magnolia Gardens documentation. Purchase agreements, renovation receipts, revenue reports, and maintenance records told the story of transforming a distressed property into Richmond's premier wedding destination. The investment had been substantial, but the returns had exceeded all projections. Jessica's dream venue existed because her father had recognized an opportunity and acted decisively. The garden she considered magical had been landscaped according to plans I'd approved. The ballroom she thought was perfect had been renovated with materials I'd selected. The service level she praised was maintained by staff members whose salaries I ultimately paid. The irony was perfect. Jessica was prepared to settle for less rather than accept help from someone she considered financially inadequate, while remaining desperate to access a venue that belonged to the man she'd dismissed. Wednesday morning brought another call from Sarah Chen. Harry, Victoria Reed contacted me again yesterday afternoon. This time, she tried a different approach, offering to pay additional fees in exchange for holding the October date without the standard deposit timeline. What kind of additional fees? $5,000 above our normal pricing, paid upon signing the contract. When I explained that our deposit policies aren't about revenue, but about securing commitment, she became even more frustrated. Victoria Reed was learning that money alone couldn't substitute for following proper procedures. She was offering to overpay rather than meet standard requirements, missing the point entirely. She's also been calling other venues around Richmond, apparently trying to find alternatives that might impress her son's fiancé. According to my contacts at competing locations, she's been quite vocal about her dissatisfaction with Magnolia Gardens' policies. Victoria's frustration was spreading throughout Richmond's wedding venue community.
Her complaints about professional treatment would likely damage her reputation more than they affected Magnolia Garden's standing. Continue handling everything by the book, Sarah. Document all interactions and maintain standard policies regardless of pressure. The morning brought familiar rhythms at Thompson's Auto Repair. Regular customers with routine maintenance, new clients seeking honest estimates, and the satisfying work of solving mechanical problems that had clear solutions. The contrast with Jessica's wedding drama was stark. In my shop, problems had causes that could be identified and fixed. Success came from competence and fair dealing rather than connections and manipulation. Around noon, Brandon himself walked through my shop door. His designer clothes looked out of place among the automotive equipment, and his expression carried the tension of someone dealing with unexpected obstacles. "Mr. Thompson, I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I wanted to discuss the wedding situation with you directly." "Of course, Brandon. What's on your mind?" "My family is having difficulty securing the venue that Jessica has her heart set on. The coordinator at Magnolia Gardens is being completely inflexible about their deposit requirements, and my mother's usual contacts haven't been helpful." Brandon was discovering that his family's influence had limits when confronting actual business policies. The venue his mother had assumed would accommodate their preferences operated according to financial rather than social principles. $20,000 is a significant deposit, I said. "It's not about the money, Mr. Thompson. My family can afford the wedding costs. It's about the principle. Venues of that caliber typically work with families like ours through relationship-based arrangements. This coordinator seems to think business policies override personal connections." The entitlement was breathtaking. Brandon expected Magnolia Gardens to waive standard procedures because his family considered themselves above normal requirements. He couldn't understand why professional business practices wouldn't bend to accommodate his expectations. "Maybe there are other venues that would be more flexible," I suggested. "Jessica won't consider alternatives. She's fixated on Magnolia Gardens specifically, and honestly, it is the perfect location for the kind of wedding we're planning. The problem is this unreasonable coordinator who won't work with us." Sarah Chen wasn't unreasonable. She was professional, applying consistent policies that protected both the venue's interests and the client's commitments. Brandon's inability to recognize professional competence revealed everything about his assumptions regarding how business should work. "What exactly are you hoping I can help you with?" Brandon shifted uncomfortably, clearly struggling with asking for assistance from someone he considered beneath his family's social standing. "Jessica mentioned that you might be willing to contribute to wedding costs if we found a more budget-friendly venue. I was wondering if you'd consider helping us meet the deposit requirement for Magnolia Gardens instead." The request was stunning in its audacity. Brandon wanted me to provide $20,000 to secure a venue his family couldn't book through their connections, while maintaining the pretense that they were handling the major expenses. He wanted my financial contribution without acknowledging my capability. "That's a substantial amount," I said. "I understand completely. My family would handle all other costs, the catering, flowers, photography, everything else. We just need help with this specific obstacle." Brandon was offering to let me pay the deposit for a venue I already owned, to help secure a booking at a property where my approval was the only requirement. The situation was so absurd it was almost amusing. "Let me think about it," I said. "Of course, Jessica will be so relieved if we can work something out. She's been stressed about potentially having to settle for a lesser venue." After Brandon left, I sat in my office contemplating the layers of irony in his request. He wanted me to solve a problem created by his family's assumption that normal business rules didn't apply to them. He was asking for financial help from someone he considered too poor to matter, to access a venue owned by the man he was asking. The education was proceeding exactly as it should. Jessica and Brandon were learning that dreams required substance, not just connections. Victoria Reed was discovering that influence meant nothing without the ability to meet basic business requirements. My phone showed a missed call from Patricia Wells. I dialed her back immediately. Harry, I've completed the documentation review you requested. Everything is in order at Magnolia Gardens, and Sarah Chin has full authority to enforce all policies. I've also prepared complete ownership records for your properties. Perfect. I may need to use those documents soon. There's something else you should know. I received an inquiry yesterday from a law firm representing the Reed family. They were asking about Magnolia Gardens' ownership structure, apparently hoping to find alternative approaches to securing a booking. Victoria Reed was escalating her efforts, trying to identify pressure points that might override standard procedures. She still couldn't accept that professional business practices wouldn't bend to accommodate her expectations.
What did you tell them? That ownership information is confidential unless there's a legitimate legal reason for disclosure. They didn't have grounds for demanding that information. The Reed family was learning that money and connections had limits when confronting properly managed business operations. Their frustration would only increase as they discovered that Magnolia Gardens couldn't be manipulated or pressured into special arrangements. Jessica called that evening, her voice carrying exhaustion and disappointment. "Dad, Brandon's family is having no luck with the venue situation. Victoria has contacted everyone she knows, and nobody seems able to influence the coordinator at Magnolia Gardens. We might have to consider other options." "I'm sorry to hear that, sweetheart." "The thing is, Dad, we really don't want to compromise on the location. Brandon thinks his family might be able to come up with the deposit money, but it would strain their budget significantly." The Reed family's budget was being strained by a $20,000 deposit, while Jessica's father could cover the entire wedding cost without financial stress. The contrast highlighted everything wrong with her assumptions about worth and capability. "Maybe I could help with the deposit," I said quietly. "Dad, that's incredibly generous, but $20,000 is probably more than you make in several months. I couldn't ask you to sacrifice that much." Several months? Jessica thought $20,000 represented months of income for her father, while the property she wanted to book generated more than that amount monthly in revenue. Her misconceptions about my financial situation were about to create the most valuable lesson of her life. Thursday morning brought the kind of Richmond weather that made October weddings so desirable. Crisp air carried the promise of autumn colors, and golden sunlight streamed through the windows of Thompson's Auto Repair as I prepared for what would become the most revealing day in my relationship with Jessica. At exactly 9 o'clock, I locked the shop and drove across town to Patricia Wells' law office. The folder in my passenger seat contained 30 years of financial documentation, property deeds, and investment records that told the complete story of Harold Thompson's actual net worth. The time for maintaining my cover was rapidly approaching its end. "Harry, the documentation is comprehensive," Patricia said, spreading papers across her conference cable. "Property portfolio valued at $12.3 million, liquid assets totaling $2.7 million, and annual income from investments averaging $800,000. The contrast with your public persona is quite dramatic." Jessica has no idea any of this exists. That's obvious from the Reed family's behavior. They're operating under the assumption that you're financially insignificant while desperately trying to access property you actually own. The bank statements told the story Patricia couldn't fully grasp. Every deposit, every investment purchase, every property acquisition had been planned around providing Jessica with opportunities she never knew existed. The wealth she thought was beyond her reach had been built specifically to ensure her future security. "I want you to prepare formal ownership disclosure for Magnolia Gardens estate. Complete documentation showing my purchase, renovation investments, and current property management arrangements. Are you planning to reveal this to your daughter? The revelation is going to happen whether I plan it or not. Jessica and Brandon are pushing toward a confrontation that will expose everything." Patricia nodded, understanding the legal implications. Once ownership becomes public knowledge, the Reed family's attempts to manipulate booking procedures will look even more inappropriate than they already do. That's exactly the point. Jessica needs to understand what she's been dismissing. My phone buzzed with a call from Sarah Chen. Her timing was perfect. "Harry, the Reed family situation is escalating. Victoria Reed contacted our main office this morning, demanding to speak with someone in executive management about Sarah Chen's unprofessional behavior." What did the main office tell her? They forwarded her complaint directly to me since I am the executive management for venue operations. She became quite angry when she realized she'd been transferred back to the same person she was complaining about. Victoria Reed was discovering that Magnolia Gardens estate didn't operate with multiple layers of management who might override professional decisions. The venue was managed efficiently, with clear authority structures that couldn't be circumvented through complaint escalation. She's also been contacting our preferred vendors, apparently trying to find alternative pressure points. Our florist, photographer, and catering partners have all received calls asking about their relationship with Magnolia Gardens management. What kind of questions is she asking? Whether they have influence over booking decisions, if they can recommend her family to venue ownership. Things that suggest she still doesn't understand how professional service businesses actually operate. Victoria Reed was learning that legitimate business relationships couldn't be leveraged for personal favors. The vendors who worked with Magnolia Gardens maintained their partnerships through quality service and professional competence, not through social manipulation. Sarah, I want you to document every contact attempt, every inappropriate request, and every vendor interaction. Create a comprehensive record of the Reed family's behavior. Of course, Harry, there's something else you should know. The bride-to-be, Jessica Thompson Reed, called yesterday asking for a personal meeting with venue management. She seems to think a face-to-face conversation might resolve what she called the misunderstanding about deposit requirements. Jessica was preparing to take matters into her own hands. My daughter, who had dismissed my capabilities while craving access to my property, was about to attempt her own negotiation with the management company I'd hired to run my investment. Schedule the meeting for tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock. I want to be present for that conversation. You want to attend a client meeting? That's unusual for you. This particular meeting requires ownership oversight. After ending the call with Sarah, I sat in Patricia's office thinking about the collision that was approaching. Jessica would arrive at Magnolia Gardens tomorrow, expecting to charm or negotiate her way around standard business practices. Instead, she would discover that the venue she considered beyond her father's reach belonged to the man she'd dismissed as too poor to matter. Patricia gathered the ownership documentation into a neat stack. Harry, are you prepared for how Jessica might react when she learns the truth about your financial situation? She's going to be angry, confused, and probably embarrassed. But she's also going to understand for the first time that her assumptions of worth and capability have been completely wrong. This could fundamentally change your relationship with her. Our relationship has already changed. Jessica made that clear when she decided I wasn't good enough for her wedding. Tomorrow, she'll discover what she actually rejected. The drive back to Thompson's Auto Repair gave me time to consider the choices that had led to this moment. 30 years of careful investing, of living modestly while building wealth, of allowing Jessica to misunderstand my financial situation rather than spoiling her with displays of affluence. Every decision had been made with her long-term welfare in mind, but the result was a daughter who respected my character while dismissing my substance. Frank Martinez was waiting when I returned to the shop, leaning against his delivery truck with a concerned expression. "Harry, I've been hearing some strange rumors around town. People saying your daughter's getting married, but there's some kind of family trouble about money." Richmond's small business community was close-knit. News traveled quickly between shop owners, suppliers, and contractors who'd worked together for decades. Frank's concern was genuine, based on years of friendship and mutual respect. "Family situations can get complicated," I said. "If you need anything, financial help, or just someone to talk to, you know I'm here. We've been doing business for 15 years. You're one of the most solid people I know." Frank's offer highlighted the contrast with Jessica's assumptions. The man who delivered parts to my shop understood my character and integrity, qualities that had built lasting business relationships throughout Richmond. My daughter saw the same qualities, but considered them insufficient for her social ambitions. I appreciate that, Frank. Things should resolve themselves soon. Good to hear. Your daughter's lucky to have a father who cares so much about her happiness. Lucky. Frank recognized what Jessica had missed entirely. The sacrifices, the careful planning, the decades of building security she never knew existed. The man who changed her oil and delivered auto parts understood my dedication better than the daughter who'd benefited from it her entire life. The afternoon brought a steady stream of customers and the familiar satisfaction of solving mechanical problems. A transmission rebuild for Mrs. Chen's aging minivan, brake work on the Rodriguez family's pickup truck, routine maintenance for professionals who trusted Thompson's Auto Repair with their transportation needs. Each interaction reminded me why I'd chosen to maintain this business, even after other investments made it financially unnecessary. At 5:30, Jessica called. "Dad, I have good news. I managed to set up a meeting tomorrow with the management at Magnolia Gardens. I think if I explain our situation properly, they'll understand that this deposit requirement is creating an unnecessary obstacle." "What kind of explanation are you planning to give?" "I'll explain that Brandon's family has the financial resources to cover all wedding expenses, but they're being prevented from accessing the venue by unreasonable policies. Sometimes these coordinators get too focused on rules instead of understanding the bigger picture." Jessica was preparing to attempt exactly the kind of manipulation that had failed when Victoria Reed tried it. She thought her personal charm could succeed where Brandon's mother's connections had failed, not understanding that professional business practices couldn't be negotiated away through persuasion. "That sounds like a good approach," I said carefully. "I'm also going to mention that you're willing to help with the deposit if necessary. That should show them we have multiple sources of financial backing." Multiple sources of financial backing. Jessica was planning to present her father's contribution as additional security, not understanding that she was offering to have me pay a deposit to myself for use of my own property. "What time is your meeting?" 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. Dad, I really think this is going to work. Once they understand that we're not just another family trying to get around their policies, but people with genuine financial capability, they'll be much more flexible." Genuine financial capability. Jessica truly believed that the Reed family's resources represented serious money compared to what her father could provide. She had no concept that my investment portfolio exceeded Brandon's family's net worth by several $1,000,000. "I hope everything works out the way you want." "It will. Dad, after this is resolved and we have the wedding venue secured, I want to talk about how grateful I am for your willingness to help. I know $20,000 is a significant sacrifice for you." Significant sacrifice. Jessica thought I was preparing to strain my finances to contribute to her wedding, while the venue she wanted to book generated more than $20,000 in monthly profit.
Her gratitude was based on completely false assumptions about my capabilities and the extent of my commitment to her happiness. After ending the call, I sat in my office reviewing the ownership documents Patricia had prepared. The papers told the story of transforming a distressed property into Richmond's premier wedding destination through careful planning, substantial investment, and professional management. The venue Jessica considered perfect existed because her father had recognized an opportunity and acted decisively. Tomorrow's meeting would reveal everything. Jessica would walk into Magnolia Gardens expecting to negotiate with venue management, only to discover that the man she dismissed as too poor for her wedding owned the property she considered beyond her reach. Friday morning began with the usual rhythm of shop operations, but my attention was focused on the afternoon meeting that would change everything. At noon, I closed Thompson's Auto Repair and drove to Magnolia Gardens estate for final preparations. The property looked magnificent in the autumn sunlight. Manicured gardens displayed the kind of maintenance that required substantial ongoing investment. The main building's colonial architecture spoke of careful restoration rather than quick renovation. Every detail reflected the standards I'd insisted upon when transforming the property into Richmond's most sought-after wedding venue.
Sarah Chen met me in the main office, her expression carrying the professional competence that made her an excellent property manager. Harry, everything is prepared for this afternoon's meeting. I've reviewed our standard policies and documented all previous interactions with the Reed family. Mrs. Thompson-Reed seemed very confident when she scheduled the appointment. Jessica has no idea what she's walking into. Should I reveal your ownership immediately or let the conversation develop naturally? Let her make her presentation first. I want to understand exactly how she plans to approach this before we reveal the truth. The conference room is ready and I've prepared copies of our standard contract terms. This should be quite educational for everyone involved. At exactly 2 o'clock, Jessica arrived at Magnolia Gardens estate. Through the office window, I watched her park Brandon's BMW and walk toward the main entrance with the confident stride of someone who expected to accomplish her mission through determination and charm. She wore her most professional outfit, a navy blue suit that projected competence and sophistication. Her hair was styled perfectly, her makeup subtle but polished. Everything about her appearance was calculated to make a positive impression on venue management she hoped to influence. Sarah Chen met Jessica in the main lobby with courteous professionalism, guiding her toward the conference room where I waited. Jessica's eyes swept the elegant interior with obvious appreciation, taking in details that represented thousands of dollars in renovation investments she knew nothing about. Mrs. Thompson-Reed, thank you for coming in today. I hope we can address your concerns about our booking procedures. I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me personally, Jessica replied, settling into the leather chair across from Sarah. I think there may be some misunderstanding about my family's situation. Sarah opened a folder containing the Reed family's inquiry history. Please, explain how we can help you. Jessica launched into her prepared presentation with confident authority. My fiancé's family has substantial financial resources and strong connections throughout Richmond's business community. We're not trying to avoid your deposit requirements, but we need some flexibility in timing due to coordination with other wedding vendors. The explanation was polished but fundamentally dishonest. Victoria Reed had demanded exceptions to standard policies, not flexibility in timing. Jessica was attempting to reframe her future mother-in-law's entitled behavior as reasonable business accommodation. Our deposit requirements are designed to protect both parties, Sarah replied. $20,000 held 30 days before the event ensures serious commitment from families planning celebrations of this scope. I understand the reasoning, but my fiancé's mother has relationships with venue management at other premier locations throughout Virginia. She's never encountered policies that couldn't be adjusted for families with proven financial capability. Jessica was invoking Victoria Reed's alleged influence while missing the point entirely. Professional venues maintain consistent policies precisely because they didn't operate through relationship-based favoritism. Mrs. Thompson-Reed, our policies apply equally to all families regardless of their connections or social standing. That consistency is what makes Magnolia Gardens a trusted venue for Richmond's most important celebrations. But surely there are exceptional circumstances that warrant flexibility. My father, for instance, has offered to contribute the deposit amount, which demonstrates our family's commitment to meeting your financial requirements. Jessica was presenting my willingness to help as evidence of her family's legitimate financial backing, not understanding the irony of using the venue owner's contribution as proof of worthiness to book his property. Sarah glanced toward the conference room door where I waited, ready to enter at the appropriate moment. Mrs. Thompson-Reed, before we continue this discussion, there's someone I'd like you to meet. The property owner wanted to participate in this conversation personally. Jessica's face lit up with obvious excitement. Meeting the owner represented exactly the kind of high-level access she'd hoped to achieve through her personal approach. That's wonderful. I'd be honored to speak with the owner directly. Sarah walked to the conference room door and held it open. Mrs. Thompson-Reed, I'd like you to meet Harold Thompson, the owner of Magnolia Gardens Estate.
I stepped into the conference room, still wearing the work clothes from my morning at the auto repair shop. Jessica's expression shifted from excitement to complete confusion as she tried to process what she was seeing. "Dad, what are you doing here?" "Sarah, I think there's been some mistake." "No mistake, sweetheart. I own Magnolia Gardens estate. I have for the past 12 years. The color drained from Jessica's face as the implications began to register. The venue she'd considered beyond her father's reach, the property she'd assumed required Brandon's family connections to access, belonged to the man she'd dismissed as too poor for her wedding celebration. "That's impossible. You run an auto repair shop. You don't have money for properties like this." I pulled out the documentation Patricia had prepared and placed it on the conference table. Property deeds, purchase agreements, renovation receipts, and tax records told the complete story of transforming a distressed estate into Richmond's premier wedding destination. "The auto repair shop is my hobby, Jessica. These properties are my business." She stared at the documents with growing comprehension and horror. Bank statements showing millions in assets, investment records spanning 3 decades, and property acquisitions that represented more wealth than she'd ever imagined her father possessing. "You've been lying to me my entire life. I've been providing for your future while teaching you to value character over money." Unfortunately, that lesson didn't take. Jessica's hands shook as she picked up the Magnolia Gardens deed with Harold Thompson listed clearly as sole owner. The venue she dreamed about, the property she'd considered perfect, had been purchased with money she thought didn't exist by the father she deemed unsuitable for her celebration.
This changes everything. The silence in the conference room stretched like a chasm between father and daughter. Jessica stared at the property documents with growing understanding of how completely she had misjudged everything. The venue she had coveted belonged to the man she had dismissed. The wealth she thought was beyond her family's reach had been built by hands she considered too dirty for her celebration. "You let me humiliate myself," Jessica whispered, her voice barely audible. "You sat there while I explained why you weren't good enough for my wedding, knowing you owned the place I was desperate to book." "I let you reveal who you had become," I replied. "Someone who judges worth by appearance rather than substance." Sarah Chen cleared her throat diplomatically. "Perhaps I should give you both some privacy for this conversation." "Stay," I said firmly. "Jessica needs to understand how her behavior has affected other people, not just me." Jessica looked between Sarah and me, her face flushing with embarrassment as the full scope of her actions became clear. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. The way I spoke about deposit policies, the way I tried to work around your procedures." "Mrs. Thompson-Reed, you weren't the problem. Your future mother-in-law's behavior was considerably more inappropriate. She demanded special treatment, threatened to use connections to override our policies, and attempted to intimidate our staff." "Victoria did all that?" "She contacted our vendors seeking leverage over management decisions. She called our corporate office to complain about professional treatment. She even had lawyers investigate our ownership structure looking for pressure points." Jessica's hands covered her face as the reality of her association with the Reed family's behavior sank in. "I had no idea she was doing those things." "But you supported her approach," I said. "You agreed that standard business practices shouldn't apply to your family. You assumed that rules were for other people." "Because I thought we needed special consideration to afford this place. I thought your money wasn't enough, so we had to rely on Brandon's family connections." "My money has been more than enough for anything you could ever want. The problem was never financial capability. The problem was that you stopped valuing the person providing that capability." Sarah pulled out another folder from her briefcase. "Mrs. Thompson-Reed, would you like to know how much your father has invested in this property over the years?" Jessica nodded wordlessly, bracing herself for more revelations that would demolish her assumptions. Initial purchase price was $800,000. Renovation and restoration costs totaled $1.2 million. Ongoing maintenance, landscaping, and facility improvements have required another $400,000 in investment over 12 years. $2.4 million, Jessica whispered. You spent $2.4 million on this place. Plus the cost of professional management, insurance, legal fees, and operational expenses. Your father's total investment in Magnolia Gardens exceeds $3 million. Jessica stared at me with new understanding. The venue I thought was impossibly expensive represents money you had lying around. Money I earned through decades of careful investment and business development. Money I could have spent on luxury cars, expensive homes, or elaborate vacations. Money I chose to invest in assets that would provide long-term security. Security for me. Security for you. Every investment decision I made was calculated around ensuring your future welfare. The rental properties that generate monthly income, the commercial buildings that appreciate in value, all of it designed to guarantee that you would never face financial uncertainty. While I was worrying about whether you could afford to help with my wedding, you had enough money to buy Brandon's family's business several times over. Sarah interjected gently. Your father also employs 43 people across his various properties. Groundskeepers, maintenance staff, cleaning crews, administrative workers. The Magnolia Gardens operation alone provides steady employment for 16 families. You're not just wealthy, Jessica said, comprehension dawning. You're a significant employer in Richmond. I'm a businessman who chose to maintain a modest public profile while building substantial private assets. The auto repair shop is profitable and personally satisfying, but it represents less than 5% of my total income. Jessica stood and walked to the conference room window overlooking the gardens she had dreamed about for her wedding. The manicured landscapes, elegant gazebos, and professional lighting systems represented investments she had never imagined her father capable of making. Everyone at the wedding will know, she said quietly. When people find out that my father owns this place, they'll realize how wrong I was about everything. Are you concerned about being embarrassed or about having been wrong? Both. Jessica turned back toward me, tears forming in her eyes. Dad, I don't know how to apologize for this. I don't know how to take back all the things I said about your financial situation. Apologies are a start, but they don't address the fundamental problem, which is, you never asked. In 28 years, you never once inquired about my business activities, my investment strategy, or my financial planning. You simply assumed that what you could see was all that existed. Sarah gathered her documents tactfully. I should mention that the October 15th date is still available. If you'd like to proceed with booking, we can discuss arrangements. Jessica looked at me uncertainly. What kind of arrangements? Standard contract terms. $20,000 deposit, full payment 30 days before the event, same policies we apply to every family who books Magnolia Gardens. You want me to pay you to rent your own property? I want you to understand that access to anything valuable requires commitment and responsibility. If you want this venue for your wedding, you'll book it the same way any other client would. But I'm your daughter, which is why it's important that you learn these lessons now rather than continuing through life with false assumptions about how the world works. Jessica sat back down, her professional composure completely abandoned. I don't have $20,000 for the deposit. Then you'll need to find a way to earn it, borrow it, or convince someone to provide it for you. Brandon's family could probably come up with the money now that they know the venue is actually available. Could they? Victoria Reed couldn't manage it when she thought she was dealing with ordinary venue management. Now she knows she insulted and attempted to manipulate the property owner's daughter. That changes the family dynamics considerably. Jessica's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it, and her face paled further. It's Brandon. He wants to know how the meeting went." "What are you going to tell him?" "I don't know. How do I explain that my father owns the venue we've been desperately trying to book? How do I tell him that his mother spent 2 weeks insulting and trying to manipulate my family?" "You tell him the truth. All of it." Jessica's hands shook as she typed a response to Brandon. "He's going to call his parents immediately. Victoria is going to be mortified when she realizes what she's done." "She should be mortified. Her behavior was completely inappropriate." "Dan, what happens now? Do I still have a chance to book this place for my wedding?" I considered the question carefully. Jessica had learned painful truths about her assumptions and behavior, but learning lessons and changing patterns were different challenges entirely. Can you treat this as a business transaction rather than expecting family favors? Can you demonstrate the same respect for booking policies that we require from other clients? Can you acknowledge that wealth and character aren't contradictory qualities? Yes, I think so.
And can you accept that your wedding will happen on terms that respect both business principles and family relationships? Jessica nodded slowly. What would those terms look like? Sarah consulted her calendar system. October 15th requires a deposit by next Friday to hold the date. Full payment is due September 15th. Standard contract includes ceremony setup, reception space, basic lighting, and grounds access for photography. The total cost? $45,000 for venue rental, based on your guest count and service requirements. Jessica absorbed the information with new understanding. $45,000 that you'll essentially be paying to yourself. $45,000 that covers actual costs of hosting your celebration. Staff wages, utilities, insurance, maintenance, and operational expenses don't disappear just because the owner is your father. I understand. Dad, I want to book Magnolia Gardens for my wedding, but I want to do it the right way. Not as your daughter expecting special treatment, but as a client who respects your business. Then you'll need to secure financing for the deposit by next Friday. Jessica pulled out her phone again. I need to call Brandon and explain everything. Then we need to have a very different conversation with his parents about wedding financing. That conversation is going to be interesting. His mother is going to want to crawl under a rock when she realizes how she's been treating you. Victoria Reed's embarrassment is less important than your understanding of what you almost threw away. Jessica stood to leave, then paused at the conference room door. Dad, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Were you hurt when I said you weren't good enough for my wedding, or were you angry about my ingratitude? The question deserved honest consideration. Both. But mostly I was disappointed that the woman I'd raised to value character had become someone who dismissed people based on their apparent social status. I'm going to fix this. I hope so, sweetheart. You have until next Friday to prove that you can. After Jessica left, Sarah and I sat in the conference room reviewing the documentation spread across the table. That was quite a revelation, Sarah said. Do you think she'll be able to secure the deposit? We'll find out. The real test isn't whether she can find the money. The real test is whether she can approach her future in-laws with honesty about what just happened. The Reed family is going to be extremely embarrassed when they learn they've been trying to manipulate your daughter's father. Good. Embarrassment is sometimes the beginning of better behavior. My phone rang with a call from Brandon. I answered immediately, curious about Jessica's explanation of the afternoon's events. Mr. Thompson, Jessica just told me the most incredible story. She says you own Magnolia Gardens estate? That's correct. Sir, I owe you a tremendous apology. My family's behavior toward your venue management has been completely inappropriate. We had no idea we were dealing with Jessica's father. Your family's behavior would have been inappropriate regardless of my relationship to Jessica. You're absolutely right. My mother is mortified. She wants to call and apologize personally for the way she treated your property manager. Victoria Reed's embarrassment is less important than your understanding of what you almost threw away. Sir, about the wedding venue.
Is there any possibility we could still book Magnolia Gardens for October 15th? The same possibility that exists for any family. $20,000 deposit by next Friday, standard contract terms, full payment 30 days before the event. We can manage those requirements. My family would be honored to host Brandon and Jessica's wedding at your property. Brandon, understand something clearly. This isn't about your family hosting anything at my property. This is about Jessica's wedding taking place at a venue she books and pays for according to standard business practices. Of course, I misspoke.
We'll handle the financial arrangements properly. See that you do. And Brandon, your mother's attempts to circumvent professional policies have created a situation that requires rebuilding trust. That process starts with demonstrating respect for the people who work here. After ending the call, I drove back to Thompson's Auto Repair with a sense of completion mixed with uncertainty. Jessica had learned the truth about my financial situation, but learning facts and changing behavior patterns were different challenges entirely. The real test would come in the following days as she navigated conversations with Brandon's family about wedding financing while accepting responsibility for her misconceptions. October 15th was still available, but earning the right to celebrate there would require demonstrating the character I'd always hoped to instill in her. Frank Martinez was waiting in the shop parking lot when I arrived, his concerned expression indicating he'd heard rumors about the afternoon's events. "Harry, people are saying your daughter discovered you own some big wedding venue. Is everything okay between you two?" "It's complicated, Frank, but I think we're heading in the right direction." "Good to hear. You've always been straight with everyone, and that counts for a lot in this business." Straight dealing, the principle that had built every successful relationship in my life, from customers at Thompson's Auto Repair to tenants in my commercial properties. The same principle Jessica was finally learning to value after dismissing it as insufficient for her social ambitions. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as the Reed family adjusted to understanding they'd been insulting their future daughter-in-law's father. But tonight, for the first time in months, I felt optimistic about Jessica's future. Friday morning arrived with crisp October air that promised perfect wedding weather. I opened Thompson's Auto Repair at the usual time, but my attention kept drifting to the clock. Today marked the deadline for Jessica's deposit on Magnolia Gardens estate. 7 days had passed since she discovered the truth about my ownership of her dream venue, and I still hadn't heard whether she'd managed to secure the necessary funding. Mrs. Patterson shuffled through my shop door at 8:30, her weathered Honda making the familiar rattling sound that meant another affordable repair was needed. She counted exact change from her worn purse, grateful for honest service that didn't strain her fixed income. Customers like her reminded me why character mattered more than appearances, why integrity built lasting relationships that social connections never could. "Harry, you're a godsend," she said, watching me diagnose her car's problem. "In a world full of people trying to take advantage, you still treat folks fairly." "That's just good business, Mrs. Patterson. Trust has to be earned every day." My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Chen. "Deposit deadline is 5 p.m. today. No word from Jessica yet. Should I prepare alternative options for the October date?" Before I could respond, Jessica's car pulled into my parking lot. She climbed out wearing jeans and a sweater instead of her usual professional attire, looking younger and more uncertain than I'd seen her in years. In her hands, she carried a bank envelope and what appeared to be a handwritten letter. "Dad, do you have a few minutes to talk?" "Of course. Let me finish with Mrs. Patterson's car and I'll be right with you." Jessica waited patiently while I completed the belt replacement that would keep Mrs. Patterson's Honda running safely for another year. She watched me work with new interest, observing the careful attention I paid to explaining the repair and ensuring customer satisfaction. "You really care about these people," Jessica said, after Mrs. Patterson drove away. "They trust me with their transportation, their safety, their budgets. That trust is worth more than any profit margin." Jessica nodded, understanding flickering in her eyes. "Dad, I've spent the past week thinking about everything that happened at Magnolia Gardens, about the assumptions I made, the way I treated you, the person I became without realizing it." "What conclusions did you reach?" "That I lost sight of what actually matters, that I started measuring worth by the wrong standards." Jessica pulled out the bank envelope. "This is the deposit from Magnolia Gardens, $20,000. I accepted the envelope without opening it.
Where did you get this money? I sold my car, liquidated my savings account, and took a loan against my jewelry, everything I owned that had any value. Jessica's voice carried quiet determination. I wanted to pay for this myself, not rely on Brandon's family or anyone else's generosity. That was quite a sacrifice. It was the first real sacrifice I've made for something important. Dad, I also wrote you a letter. Not an apology, because words aren't enough, but an acknowledgement of what I learned. Jessica handed me the handwritten pages with trembling fingers. The letter was several pages long, written in her careful script that reminded me of homework assignments I'd helped her complete years ago. I don't need to read this now, I said gently. Please, I need you to understand how much has changed. I unfolded the pages and began reading. Jessica's words revealed deep reflection about her behavior, her misconceptions, and her gradual realization of how her pursuit of social status had corrupted her judgment. She wrote about discovering that her father's quiet dignity was worth more than Brandon's family's ostentatious connections. I realized that you taught me everything important through your example, not your lectures. Honesty, hard work, treating people fairly regardless of their circumstances. I just stopped paying attention to those lessons when I decided they weren't sophisticated enough for the life I wanted. The letter continued with specific acknowledgments of her mistakes, her gratitude for opportunities she'd never properly appreciated, and her commitment to rebuilding our relationship on honest foundations rather than false assumptions. Jessica, this shows real understanding of what went wrong. I hope so. Dad, there's something else. I called off the engagement to Brandon. The statement caught me completely off guard. Why? Because when I told his family the truth about you owning Magnolia Gardens, their reaction showed me everything I needed to know about their character. Victoria was embarrassed about her behavior, but more concerned about maintaining face than making genuine amends. Brandon was excited about the family connections he thought your wealth would provide. Jessica sat down on the wooden chair beside my desk, looking more mature than she had in years. They saw dollar signs where I should have seen my father's love. They wanted access to your assets while continuing to look down on your values. That must have been a difficult realization. It was liberating. I realized I was about to marry into a family that shared all my worst qualities and none of my best ones. Jessica managed a small smile. Turns out I prefer the values I learned in this auto shop to the ones I learned at country club parties. What about the wedding? I still want to have the wedding at Magnolia Gardens, but as a celebration of becoming the person you raised me to be, not the person I thought I needed to become to impress other people. I walked to the shop window and looked out at the neighborhood that had been my professional home for 30 years. Working families, honest businesses, people who understood that character mattered more than appearances. The community I'd been proud to serve while building wealth Jessica never knew existed.
And you're prepared to meet those obligations? I've got a job interview Monday morning at Richmond Community Bank. Entry-level position, but honest work that will help me build something real, instead of depending on other people's achievements. Jessica had spent her entire adult life avoiding employment, assuming her father's support would continue indefinitely. The decision to seek work represented more than financial necessity. It represented acceptance of adult responsibility she'd avoided for years. I'm proud of you for taking control of your financial future. I learned from the best example possible. Dad, would you walk me down the aisle when I get married? Not as the man paying for my wedding, but as my father, who taught me everything worth knowing about living with integrity. The request carried none of the casual assumptions that had characterized our previous conversations about wedding plans. Jessica was asking for my participation as her father, not my funding as her benefactor. I'd be honored to walk you down the aisle. Jessica stood and hugged me tightly, the first spontaneous affection she'd shown in years. Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave up on the values you taught me. I never gave up on you, sweetheart. I just had to let you find your way back to who you really are. So the wedding is officially happening at Magnolia Gardens? October 15th, just like you originally planned.
Sarah will prepare the standard contract, and you'll have the celebration you've always dreamed about." Jessica picked up her purse and headed toward the shop door, then turned back with a final question. "Dad, when people ask how I could afford Magnolia Gardens on a bank teller's salary, what should I tell them?" "Tell them your father taught you that worth isn't measured by what you own, but by what you're willing to sacrifice for the things that truly matter, and that you raised a daughter who finally learned to appreciate the difference." After Jessica left, I called Sarah Chen to confirm the booking and authorize preparation of the wedding contract. October 15th would showcase Magnolia Gardens at its autumn peak, with golden foliage providing the perfect backdrop for a celebration that honored both tradition and transformation. Frank Martinez arrived that afternoon with parts for an engine rebuild. His familiar presence provided continuity in a week of dramatic revelations. "Harry, word around town is that your daughter's wedding is back on track and the venue situation got resolved. Everything worked out exactly as it should have." "Good to hear. You've always been the kind of father who puts family first while teaching solid values. That combination is rare these days." Family first and solid values. Frank understood something that had taken Jessica years to recognize. True wealth couldn't be measured in bank statements or property deeds. It was found in relationships built on mutual respect, in character that remained constant regardless of circumstances, in love that persevered through disappointment and emerged stronger.
The October wedding would celebrate Jessica's return to the values I'd always hoped to instill. Magnolia Gardens would provide the elegant setting she dreamed about, funded by lessons that proved more valuable than any inheritance I could have left her. At 5 o'clock, I locked up Thompson's Auto Repair and drove home to the modest house where Jessica had learned her first lessons about integrity. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as she started building an independent life based on her own efforts rather than other people's generosity. But tonight, for the first time in years, I felt certain that the woman I'd raised had finally learned to value what truly mattered. The education that began with disappointment had ended with wisdom that would serve her far better than any trust fund ever could. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.